Hi there, my name is Ryan, and you're watching part 2A of my tutorial series on creating a recycler view on the Android platform. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into the tutorial. I may be a little bit slower of a speaker than you might like, and so I just thought, probably a lot of you know this already, but if you'd be watching this on YouTube or via YouTube through my blog, you can always speed up the video by 1.25 times or 1.5 times or something like that if the tutorial is just not really progressing along as fast as you'd like. So I just thought I'd mention that, just a handy little tool that I use quite a bit. So without further ado, we'll just kind of dive in here. For part 2A, we're basically just going to set some basic files up and leave the complicated coding for the next tutorial, and we'll just kind of get the project set up. So this is of course Android Studio. I mentioned this in the blog post. I can't remember if I mentioned it in the previous video, but we're going to be working in Android Studio as opposed to Eclipse. While there's no reason you shouldn't be able to complete this tutorial in Eclipse, there's a couple things like importing libraries that if memory serves were a nightmare in Eclipse, at least for me a year and a half ago when I was a noob. We're going to be using Gradle to import the appropriate libraries, which is literally as simple as importing one line of code. So I would suggest you set up Android Studio for this, but as I say, you should still be able to do this in Eclipse. I'm just not really going to be able to answer any questions on that if you have any difficulties. So we're going to go to File, New Project, and we'll call this project DerpList. And it's kind of a silly name, but you'll see why later on, because it's kind of a stupid app that doesn't really do anything useful, but it's just meant as a learning tool, basically. You can go ahead and select phone and tablet if it isn't selected there already. And API 16 is fine. The RecyclerView support library does cover you all the way down until API 7, so you could in theory select that as well. Just to eliminate as many variables as possible, and for the purposes of this tutorial, we're just going to leave it at API 16. So I would suggest you do the same thing. Just jump ahead here. Select empty activity, not blank activity. Blank activity adds some boilerplate kind of code that we'd have to delete anyway, so just go ahead and do that. And we'll call this list activity. Oh, no. List activity, not layout, perfect. And that's basically going to be our main activity that manages the recycler view. Oh great, IDE internal error right off the bat. We're off to a good start, folks. I'm sure it'll sort its shit out in a minute. Okay, perfect. So to begin with, we're just going to add a couple of files to our project here. So I'm just going to make a couple new packages. So we'll make one package adapter, make a package called model, and a package called UI. So some of you more experienced programmers probably understand what I'm doing here, but just for a little bit of extra information, what I try and do with my apps is follow this pattern called MVC, Model View Controller pattern. You can check that out if you like. And part of that is just making sure that relevant class files are kind of contained in relevant folders. So model is going to be the kind of the data classes that we deal with, the actual data. Adapter is a little bit different, but probably that could be thought of as maybe the controller, although to a degree the activity might be controller as well. I don't know. But it's just a good idea to make intelligent package names and then put your classes in there accordingly. We're going to move the list activity into UI. Just do that refactor there. We'll add two classes to our model package. So the first one we'll add is derp data. That's going to be that dummy data source that I mentioned in the previous video. So we'll work on that in a minute. We'll add another Java class called ListItem. So basically ListItem Actually, no, I'll get into that once I finish building the other stuff. As you can probably tell, I'm kind of doing this to some degree as I go, so you'll just have to bear with me. Derp adapter is the next class we'll build. So that's actually the adapter that we will hook into our recycler view. And that's where most of the magic of this tutorial is going to happen. It's a somewhat complicated class, although once you fiddle around with it enough, it's not that difficult to figure out. Lastly, just one more class. We'll add a layout to our layout XML file here. And that's going to be called ListItem. I probably don't need to type .xml, but did it anyway. Yep, so that's those are the files that we'll need. I'm also going to head into our Gradle files here. So you're going to want to open up the build Gradle file that says module app. There's a couple different, I believe that's called the app level Gradle file. There's a few others that we don't really want to mess around with, and it should look about like this when you open it up. And I'm just going to add a line of code here. Let me just grab it. Okay. And this is basically the library that we use to import the recycler view. And it is screaming at me, so I'll try and figure that out. Different kind of single quotes, I guess. And I can actually bump that up. So, as of making this tutorial, the version of RecyclerView has actually increased. I'm actually just going to leave it at 23.1.1 for now, and we're just going to fly with that. It should work fine. But you can always increase that. Just a quick tip: if you want to increase something quickly and or update the version number of something in Gradle, if you click on this yellow highlighted text and hit Alt-Enter, it'll actually give you the option to change it right to what you need. As I said, I'm just going to leave it like that for now, and we'll see if that bites me in the ass later. And we're just going to do a Gradle sync. Okay, I'll sit there. So we're going to start by setting up, let's see, ListItem.xml. So I'm just going to format this. Control-Shift-L. No, that's not the one I want. That's the one I want. Control-Alt-L, and that just kind of lines things up properly. So for layout height, a somewhat standard height for recycler view items, at least the size of item that I want to display is going to be a 56 dip. So that's going to basically, this recycler view item is going to contain just an icon and some text beside it. If you're doing like a 3-line or 2-line text stacked on top or something like that, that's going to change the height of the layout. And there's different ways you can format this, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we're just going to keep it very, very simple and basic. So we'll go ahead and set that to 56 dip. Match parent is fine for the width. Orientation is, of course, going to be horizontal. In order to make it so that our icon isn't squished right up against the side of the screen, we're going to add some padding left here. And we'll hopefully see what that looks like in a minute here. And 16 dip is kind of a very standard padding to have views sort of offset from the screen. That's going to be yellow because it probably wants me to add padding start, but we're just not going to worry about that at the moment. And let's see, I'm also going to want to give this container an ID. We won't even really use this ID for this part of the tutorial or the next, but once we add the on-click listener later on, we are going to want to have an ID for this layout here, this linear layout, at plus ID, and we're going to call that container item root. That's kind of the naming convention that I like to use. And also we'll add a little bit of gravity here. And let's see, close. So I kind of want the to start with, I want the views to be centered in this 56 dip container, vertically speaking. So we'll say center vertical. And then I also want them to kind of be justified left. So we'll just add that in, and I misspelled vertical. There we go. So that should be all set. I'm not sure, why is it, oh yeah, it's the start left thing. Won't worry about that. We're going to need an image view, of course, to display the icon that we want to show. So somewhat standard height for icons is going to be 36 dip by 36 dip. I'll be going into a lot more detail in the following videos about things like aesthetics. For now, we're just going to kind of slap this stuff in and not worry too much about how it looks. So just bear that in mind while we do this. I'm trying to go along pretty quick through this layout section so that the video isn't 30 minutes long. Item icon, and so IM stands for image view. Item sort of refers to the layout, and then the last name there is just something I used to kind of describe it. So that's the naming convention that I usually like to use. And then we'll need a text view. Let's see. Width, I guess wrap content is fine, and match parent for the height, although I will want that to be centered just inside of there. So we'll say Android, let's see, gravity, center. Oh, I missed a few things in image view because I'm busy talking and coding at the same time. Alright. So for the source of the image view, I figured the best thing to do would be to use a couple of kind of default Android resources. So instead of saying just @drawable and then giving the resource ID, I'm actually starting with Android :drawable. So that kind of taps into Android's kind of default resources. And just as a placeholder, if nothing else, we're going to say IC menu edit, throw that in there. And that creates this little pencil icon here. And we're going to be using the kind of Android resource icons just so that you guys don't have to download anything and set it up that way. Lastly, just because the background of our list item is going to be white, naturally we're going to want to tint this icon, and the subsequent icons something a little different. I'm just going to make it the default primary color that was generated when we created the project, which is just kind of a royal bluish type thing. Alright, so that's it for image view. Sorry about jumping around on you, but as I say, I'm kind of flying it by the seat of my pants here. We're going to want to give a bit of padding to this text view so that it's not, again, squished up against the icon. And that's going to be 8 dip left. And a bit of dummy text in here. Let's see. Derpson. There, that's good. And it's going to scream at me about having pre-formatted text, but let's just see here. So, oh, I am missing the ID. That's what we're missing. So we're going to need to give all of these views and view groups IDs because we'll be grabbing references to them in our Java code. So I like to label text views as LBL for label, kind of an old habit from other languages, and item text. And that should be everything. I'm not sure if it's going to let me preview. Oh, okay, good. So that's just a preview of what our list view item is going to look like, or recycler list item, I guess it's called. And so yeah, basically the ListItem XML is going to be the graphical representation of the data that we're trying to display. So, you know, just an icon and some text. If you remember from the Gmail example, there's like a title, title of the email, contact name, bit of body of the text and stuff like that. This is just to keep things super simple, but you can add different stuff in here. So that's it for ListItem XML. The only other thing we need to play around with the layouts is adding our recycler view to our activity here. I'm actually going to delete all this default padding because we already set the padding in our recycler view's list item, so that's not necessary. So let's see. In order to create the recycler view, we're just going to type Android, and it's kind of an autocomplete there. We want the support v7 recycler view. Match parent is totally fine. And there's a few other things we need to set. Just the ID. ID. Just the ID proceeds to type layout ID, and we're just going to call that rec list, just to keep things super simple. Maybe format that a little bit, again hitting Control-Alt-L. And that should be everything. Do I need to do anything to the layout? Nope, that's all good. So that's our layout files done. So the next thing we'll move on to, and the last thing of this tutorial, is going to be creating the dummy data source. So we're going to navigate over to derp data. So basically what this class is it's meant to mimic the kind of data that we would be receiving from, say, a SQLite database or from the web or just something like that. And don't look at it as a masterful art piece of code. We're just going to kind of hard code some data in here and then get set up that way. So the first thing we're going to do a private static final string array, call it titles, and I'm just going to copy and paste some text over. For some reason I decided to do esoteric quotes of Bruce Lee on the subject of Zen. Things like nothingness cannot be defined, softest thing cannot be snapped, etc., etc. And that'll be the titles that we'll be inputting in there. Just 3 is fine. We'll be repeating them kind of over and over again, so 3 is plenty. Going to do public static final int array. Now the reason why this is an int is Android's layout resource, I'm not sure what you call that, layout resource locators or whatever, are represented as integers or numbers. So we're going to make that int. Why are you screaming at me? Oh, I forgot to give it a name. That would do it. We're going to call that one icons. Perfect. Now, just about it. This thing's only going to have one method. We don't even need a constructor because the data is already inputted in there and it's static. So public static list item. So the goal here is I want this data class to produce a list of list items, and that's going to be very key later on, as you'll see. Get list data, and so list item, and we'll call that data equals new array list. We just want to create kind of a new array list there. Okay, so I'm just going to copy and paste this in rather than typing this all out. So basically what's going on here, my mistake, we were supposed to set up the list item first, so we're just going to jump over to that for a minute. This just takes like 2 seconds. So the ListItem.xml is just going to have string title. Sorry about that, I'm trying to make this coherent, but you'll just have to bear with me. Private string title, and then private private int, and I believe that was image res. Alright, let's just call it res ID. No, right, image res ID. Okay, and so those are basically the two pieces of data that represent this ListItem.xml. We'll just say Java representation of our data to be displayed in the RecyclerView. RecyclerView. Okay, and we're going to need some getters and setters there. So we'll just go to code, generate, getter and setter for both title and image res ID. Perfect. Alright, there we go. Sorry about that. So, yep, that's how we want to set up our ListItem.java there. And so this list is, of course, a list of this ListItem class, and as we'll see later on, that's going to be super important. And of course, once that's done, we'll just say return data. So all that's going on here is I've just got two loops that are going to create, they'll start by creating 3 different list items that we will append to our list called data, and then it just repeats that process 3 or 4 times for a total of 12 list items in this list that we'll be passing to our recycler view. The reason why I wanted 12 items there as opposed to say 3 is strictly so that you can see the scrolling function of the recycler view. It doesn't actually need to be 12 or anything like that, but I just wanted to add that in there. Just going to hit Control-Alt-L, everything's all formatted. And that is our derp data class. So that's everything we need. Basically what we're going to use this class for is in our list activity, when we set up our recycler view's adapter, known as derp adapter, we're just going to call this derp data's getListData class, and then it's just going to pass in the data that we want to our derp adapter, and we'll be setting that up later. So I will catch you in the next video. And again, sorry for jumping all over the place there. That's just, you're just going to have to bear with me. Thanks for watching.